Hi everyone, welcome to Digital Law News. It's brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. If you don't know already, I'm Laura Spencer, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law, a law firm which is focused on applying applying the law of digital and technology matters, including international e-commerce, data protection, cybersecurity, data privacy, and things like international data transfers. So I'm joined today by my colleague and Managing Director, Peter Wright. If you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Laura, and hello everyone. My name is Peter. I'm the Managing Director at Digital Law. I'm also a past chair of the Law Society's Technology and Law Committee and chair of their GDPR working group. So dealing with these sorts of issues on a regular basis.
Great. So should we start off?
Yeah, let's kick off.
Right, so if any of you have watched these before, we did the one last week. So basically, we're just going to flick through some slides, introduce the topic. It's been in the news recently, so things like the ICO, the NCSC, and on websites like that. And then I'll introduce it and pass over to Peter, and then we'll just have a little discussion about it. So the first one we're going to be talking about today is contact tracing. So obviously on the 4th, this weekend, just gone, the pubs reopened and restaurants. So the government have released some guidance on it, but the ICO have actually published something as well. So this is just some steps on what you can do because obviously when you're going into a pub now, you have to collect the personal data of the people who are coming in. So it's just A, ask for what's needed, B, be transparent, C, carefully store the data, D, don't use it for other purposes, and E, arrange it in line with government guidance. So it's just some quick 5 steps that you can do if you are in that sector, obviously, to think about.
It certainly is, yes. Thank you for introducing that, Laura. And of course, this was for those who were able to go and enjoy a beer in a pub or a bar or a restaurant for the first time this weekend. These are the sorts of things that were making the experience a little bit different from what we were used to. So indeed, all of this information is being collected by all of the different hostelries that you might visit. They are required to put up privacy notices. They are required to show that they were collecting this data, keeping it for 21 days. The first time this was done was on Super Saturday, Saturday the 4th of July in the UK. And interestingly, since that happened, there have subsequently been bars and restaurants in the last couple of days where patrons who were there on Saturday or Sunday have subsequently been tested positive for coronavirus. And a few bars, one in Yorkshire and I think another one in the southeast, have turned around and they've had to close. And they've then had to go through and work out who else was present at the same time that the person who's tested positive for coronavirus was present as well. So that's why they're keeping these records. It's an effort to try and implement a clear contact tracing system. And while it is obviously not great that people are testing positive for the virus and that these places are having to close, it is a sign that the system seems to be working, which I think we have to take as a positive. The key thing, and for those who are more interested in this, we actually did quite a detailed standalone webinar on this last week with Heather Anson from Anson Evaluate as well. So if you are interested in getting this in more detail, please do let us know either in the question section on this webinar or contact us admin@digitallawuk.com and we can facilitate access for you to that webinar recording as well, so you can see that in much more detail.
Yeah, I think the only thing with this, it's good that a lot of bars have now introduced this. So I went out to the pub yesterday for my lunch, and somebody came round and said, "Can you just log on to the app and the NHS track and trace app and check in to say you've been here?" But I couldn't find anything. So I think some of the pubs are not actually making it clear how to do it. They're just saying, and it's not. Although government have said as well that it's required, it's like they're saying, well, it's your choice. So I think a lot of people are still not giving their details because they can't be bothered, really.
Yes. And interesting, Laura, was that like a chain bar or restaurant you went into, or was that just a little local one you went to?
No, it was just a local. It was in Hoyland Swain, about 30 minutes away from the office.
And the reason why I asked that is because um, at the moment the NHS official app, as far as I'm aware, has never actually been made available for download on the UK mainland. So it went for a limited trial on the Isle of Wight, and
Yeah.
then hasn't gone into wider circulation. But I think it illustrates the fact that people are sometimes hearing or seeing things in terms of what they think is required and not necessarily understanding what needs to be implemented. So big chains like Witherspoons, for example, always did have a app where you could go in and order
Yeah.
your drinks and food online. And of course, that would then store your information as well. So it's been a simpler exercise for them to say, right, all the orders through the app, please, so they can comply with the requirements of this. Whereas, of course, very few bars and restaurants were doing that and having those sort of delivery apps available.
Yeah.
There are loads of apps on the market now, but of course they might do things to try and comply with these guidelines, but whether they do it in a manner that complies with data protection law and cybersecurity best practice is another matter. And that's where I think it's a real challenge for different bars and restaurants to try and make sure that they are taking the steps they need to in a safe and secure manner.
Yeah, definitely. Because I know I'd be a little bit cautious. I know I go to Witherspoons quite a lot, like normally, and I'm used to using the Witherspoons app, and I know that it's all right, and it's got my payment details on there. But I know it's fine because like you use it on like a weekly basis usually. Whereas I feel like I'd be a bit more cautious going into a different pub and using a different app that I don't recognise because you never know. I know this is just going to be fried for hacking as well, things like that.
Indeed, and I think there's always that danger when you end up sort of leaving payment card information on an app. You want to make sure that it is safe and secure. The Witherspoons app, which has been downloaded thousands of times by users and has got a lot of technology behind it, you're probably safe to do that. But indeed, some of the apps you've never heard of before, you wouldn't want, by all means, carry out the transaction, but particularly if you aren't sure if you're going to go back there in the immediate future, don't leave your credit card information on there associated with your profile. No matter how tempting it may be to think, oh, don't have to enter the number all over again. It's better just to only end up leaving that payment information on there if, like you say, you're going to be going back every week, every couple of weeks or whatever, and making it worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next one, this is also by the ICO. So the UK regulators joined forces to ensure that online services work well for consumers and businesses. So the Competition and Markets Authority have joined together with the ICO and Ofcom, and they've set up a new forum to help ensure online services work well with consumers and businesses. So this is the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, and it aims to harness the collective expertise when it comes to like data, privacy, competition, communications, and content interact.
Yes, and this is quite an interesting step. And that's for several reasons. One is the fact that it's a good initiative from these three regulators. So Ofcom that looks at communications, the ICO looking at data, and the Competition and Markets Authority, which is the UK's competition regulator. Now, the CMA takes on quite an interesting role in the UK now that the UK has left the European Union. There is within the European Union a competition commissioner and a very powerful competition regulator, which has had ultimately a say over the regulation of competition in the UK during the UK's membership of the EU. Now the UK is out from that. It's very important that organisations like the CMA are very much setting out their stall in terms of what they expect and how they're going to regulate competition and markets in the future. Interestingly, the chap who's been the chairman of the CMA for the last few years actually resigned a couple of weeks back, saying that he was dismayed by the growing influence of US tech firms, so social media corporations, Apple, Amazon, Google. And he felt that there was more he was going to be able to do to tackle the influence of those corporations through Parliament than actually through his role as chair of the regulator. So that was his sort of final say on it. Now there will be the appointment of a new chair and new leadership at the CMA. And once the UK exits the Brexit transition period at the end of this year, so as of January 2021, that will become an increasingly important role in terms of the way that the market in the UK works. So the fact that therefore you've got the CMA, the ICO and Ofcom working together on this forum, utilise their expertise, where data privacy and competition are going to be so important for our economy as it grows post-COVID. Where it's also going to be rebalancing post-Brexit. The UK government has said, look, it wants to very much level up. It has this levelling up agenda saying that London and South East has benefited, whereas the rest of the country, in particular the North, has not. So it wants to level up growth across the whole country. And also the UK government is committed to a net zero carbon target by 2050, which actually means that, again, businesses will have to change a lot and the markets will have to change in terms of how they operate, in terms of how they're becoming more sustainable and therefore contributing to that target. So the reason I lump all of those together is that the future growth that we have from this year, which is now going to be even more important on the back of the lockdown and the recovery post-COVID. And let's face it, we're going to be in a depression for most of this year and into next year as a result. All of that growth is going to be influenced very heavily by what the CMA does. So the fact that we have that regulation cooperation forum is an incredibly important first step, and I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that. And I think I've talked about this at length now, but I think in our news updates in the future, we'll be coming back to this forum again and again and again. Indeed, I hope that we do, because if we do, it means it's working.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think this one will be around for a bit. And I mean, I think it's they've formed it now, but nothing from them yet. So I'm sure we'll cover it again at some point.
Indeed. Let's look at the next one.
Yep. So the next one is by the ICO again, and this is a monetary penalty against Decision Technologies Limited. So they've been fined £90,000 for contravention of the Regulation 22 of the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation of 2013. So I think this one's just really important because it just shows that the ICO is still there. I know they released, I think in his last one, we've had a conversation about this before, but they've released things in the ICO saying that they're still continuing to work, but they are taking a bit more of a back step during this period of lockdown and everything. But it just shows that they're still looking into stuff, still giving fines, and now you can't just forget about data protection because, it's still important.
Absolutely right. It's a very important marker, this fine, because it's showing that while the main part of the economy that's kept going during the lockdown is, of course, digital. Everyone's been ordering their food online, ordering takeaways and deliveries. I even saw an app advertised on TV last night where you can now buy a car solely through an app, and they'll even come and deliver it outside your house. Now, but buying a car through a website isn't a new thing, but the fact that you could do it at the space of a few clicks on an app is an app dedicated to that. And that is very much going to be the direction of travel, with digital taking up a much larger share of the economy as the economy recovers and rebuilds after this year. So for the regulator to be turning around and saying, yes, we are continuing with our fines, we're continuing with our enforcement is incredibly important. It is also important to be saying that this is under, first of all, it's under the old Section 55 of the DPA, so it's an ongoing piece of regulation, but it's also the fact that we have a contravention of the Privacy and Electronic Communications regulations. Now, Laura, you and I both know from conversations we have with our clients and events that we attend and literature that we see that everyone always thinks that data protection is GDPR and it's about consent. And this proves neither of those assertions are true. Because PECR, PECA 2003, governs a lot of the marketing emails that are sent out.
Yeah.
And I remember being at an event in Westminster a few years ago where the Information Commissioner was speaking. I keep on being asked ahead of the introduction of GDPR, what should we be putting on our marketing emails when we're sending these out? What do we need to do? What do we need to do? And the ICO sort of basically, it was the equivalent to sort of writing this on a post-it note and sticking it on a forehead as if to say, that is nothing to do with GDPR. She said, that comes down to the privacy and electronic communications regs.
Yeah.
So things like making sure that you can unsubscribe easily, that is a one-button unsubscribe, that you are not continuing to spam people and sending unsolicited communications. That isn't a GDPR point, that's a marketing point covered by these regulations. And indeed, which in turn implement the e-privacy directive. There is supposed to be an e-privacy regulation that's supposed to come in at the same time as GDPR. It hasn't come in. It hasn't come in Europe. It certainly hasn't come in the UK. And of course, now the UK has left the EU. The implementation of that, subject to any at the end of this transition period and any post-Brexit deal, is very much up in the air. But funnily enough, I was actually talking to a journalist earlier today who's based in Brussels, who said that that regulation, the e-privacy regulation, is currently stuck in a trilogue between the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the European Council, and it's been stuck in there for several years, and it simply hasn't come out. So, as it stands, PECA 2003 remains the most up-to-date piece of legislation on this. And again, it's important that the ICO is here saying, we're still enforcing this. We aren't sitting back waiting for an e-privacy regulation to come in. We are continuing to fine under the existing legislation, and £90,000 is still not an amount that can be easily sniffed at or dismissed. So this is very much an indicator of full speed ahead from the ICO, really.
Yeah, I think it's important as well. Like you said, a lot of people just think data protection, that's it. When you're thinking about stuff in your business, you think, oh, data protection, if it don't apply to data protection, not personal data, everything falls away. But there is like a lot of regulations in the background that people need to be thinking about as well.
Exactly, and Laura, you said right at the top of the news today. You know, you're pointing out that as a firm, we advise people on international data transfers. Only a very small part of that is GDPR. It's everything from the EU-US Privacy Shield to then when we're working with our clients in the Middle East, in Asia, in Australia, in America, there are loads of different things to take into account. So it really does come down to it that GDPR is actually only quite a small part of that overall tapestry of different bits of regulation and best practice. And as far as we're concerned, the ICO remains our regulator in the UK, and they're proving here that they're still hammering away, enforcing the existing regulation that we have, regardless of what may end up being introduced in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Move on to the next one. So this is another GDPR data protection related. It's been, 2 years now since GDPR, and it's had a review. And EU's global data protection ambitions have released a report on it. So businesses will be expecting to see continued pushback towards a more global approach to data protection in light of the EU review. So a few findings that were in this review on GDPR was like the fact that there's a lot of fragmentation and differences between the different countries in terms of how GDPR is like applied in their country. A common one as well is that the fact that the right to data portability isn't being utilised to its full potential. And one of the main points that they mentioned as well was the administrative burdens on SMEs, so small to medium enterprises.
Indeed. It's quite interesting, this sort of stopgap review of sort of looking where we are in terms of GDPR now a few years in. There has been some significant regulation in terms of the actual fines and enforcement. You know, Google was the first one to get that €50 million fine from CNIL in France. Interestingly, the ICO took a big lead in the fines that it charged against Marriott and BA, though interestingly those are still subject to ongoing enforcement and not a penny has yet been paid.
Yeah.
And I think that actually points to that first point there of that degree of fragmentation. There's been different approaches taken by different EU regulators to how they want to handle enforcement. Some have been very proactive, going on, giving questionnaires to different businesses saying, please confirm this information to us. Others have been a bit more draconian with how they've tried to then investigate and levy fines. But the interesting thing that this actually demonstrates is even with a fairly new piece of legislation like GDPR, you tend to think, this is a regulation. It came into force across Europe at this precise time, 25th of May 2018. So surely the law across the EU single market is all the same, and of course it isn't. As we know, there are derogations contained in there. So the way it's been applied in Germany differs to how it's been applied in France, which differs to how it's been applied at a legislative level in the UK.
Yeah.
Before we then look at the fact that each different regulator is enforcing it in a slightly different way. So it means that it's almost like GDPR is equal, but some places are more equal than others, shall we say, the famous George Orwell Animal Farm quote. So it's not necessarily a level playing field across all countries, and that really creates additional burden for all businesses, and in particular then for those SMEs who are trying to comply, trying to do their level best, but sometimes find themselves being clobbered by not so much the fines, but just the extra added cost and burden of trying to ensure you're doing all you can reasonably be expected to do, given your size and given the resources you have available. And I still wonder if in future years we may see a slight rolling back of some of the application of GDPR when it does come to those smaller and startup businesses, because we don't want to be throttling our innovators and entrepreneurs with red tape before they've even got off the ground. And that has always been, I think, the slight risk with GDPR, where, as you know, when we're sitting down with our entrepreneurial clients all over the world, we're very often saying to them, have you done a data protection impact assessment at the start? Which can be a good idea, but at the same time, if you've got a startup entrepreneur with a limited budget, we're very often pointing them to Kinill's free DPIA tool rather than charging them to do an in-depth one for that very reason.
Because if you think about it, the last thing you need to be worrying about when you're starting up your new business is all the regulations that you've got to comply with. And I think sometimes GDPR slips under that mat a little bit because I think it's just too expensive, and complying with this is just not at the top of our list.
Exactly, and it's also the fact that depending on what the business is trying to do, we work with a lot of digital businesses. With the best will in the world, they're very keen to say, look, we want to comply with this, but trying to get them to engage with it in the way that I think those that drafted it envisaged that people would, is still very much an uphill task. It is always the way with entrepreneurs that they will want to build and get an app or product or system out to market and start, turning the wheel, building turnover, getting users, and the application of best practice data protection, impact assessments, and everything. You might want them to start doing it at the outset, and GDPR tries to encourage that, but doing it in practice is another matter, as we are often seeing.
Yeah, I think we often see that. So, like, a client will come to us and say, "So I've built this app already. Now I need to think about GDPR." And you're like, "Well, you should have done that a few months ago." But it's kind of like it needs to be drilled that you need to start that from the beginning, and then as well, like the small to medium businesses, like that have like a smaller fund, it's more spread out. But I think that needs to be like advertised more, and a lot of stuff needs to be put in place to actually help those businesses.
Exactly. And the other point on that summary is also very interesting, the fact that the right to data portability isn't being used to its full potential. I mean, GDPR does introduce this raft of data subject rights, everything from the beefed up requirements on subject access requests to the right to portability, the right to rectification, the right to deletion, all of these very key additional rights compared to what was there before. It adds to a very significant package. Yet, certainly, again, from the experience we have with our clients, the only one that seems to have landed as far as the public is concerned is subject access requests.
Yeah.
And even then, they seem to conflate it with the Freedom of Information Act request and think that, if I make my subject access request, I will receive thousands of pages of data related to all the information they have been storing on me, when that's not actually what GDPR says has to be provided. So there's that gap between, I think, public awareness and education and then what's actually in GDPR itself.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. So moving on to the next one. So this is still on the same topic. So the California digital, what's the name of it now? Can you remember
California
the name?
Consumer Privacy Act.
That's the one. So that came into effect at the start of this year, so on the 1st of January 2020, but it's only just been brought into enforcement. So there was a lot of pushback by businesses and things like that in California, wanting to extend the enforcement, so push it back a little bit so it's not being enforced yet. But the regulator has confirmed that they will now start enforcing it, so they'll be issuing fines and warnings and things like that, just like the ICO does, but obviously the American regulator.
Indeed, and it will be interesting to see what that enforcement and regulation starts to look like. We have to remember that the data protection as a concept and our way of approaching it in Europe, which has been to have regulators and enforcement and monetary penalty, is quite alien in the United States. When I speak to US lawyers and US businesses, they very often refer to that they'll see a fine that the ICO has given and they assume that the Information Commissioner has sued someone who's broken the regulations and that's what it relates to. And when you say no, they've been fined, and this is a penalty applied to them. Very often they'll look at they've got at least two heads, if not three, because it's just a totally different approach of having a regulator with teeth turning around and giving out fines. So it will be interesting to see how California chooses to approach it, particularly given the fact that, of course, all of the big tech firms from Facebook to Amazon to Apple to Snap all have their origins and still a lot of operational bases and infrastructure in California. So it's, I thought it was very brave of California to bring in this legislation. There is varying data protection legislation on a state-by-state basis across the US, but still no federal data protection law. So the closest we're going to get to it is this regulation in California and how they're now going to apply that regulation. How proactive are they going to be? What sort of decisions are we going to see? Is it going to be censuring or actually going to be levies? Are they going to call people out by name? Are we going to go into the detail of the practices where they feel there's been a transgression? I wait with bated breath to find out exactly what it's going to look like, because there's been an awful lot of talk about CCPA since it was passed by the legislature and since it came in, but now we actually start to find out if it has any teeth.
Yeah, I think we've had a conversation about this before as well. A lot of people think that you comply with GDPR, so then you comply with the California Act. But I mean, I think we've taken a look at the Act, and there is a lot of differences. Some are more strict, some are more lenient, but it's not the same.
Yes, and it's actually incredibly dangerous to think that, I comply with GDPR, therefore I comply with CCPA. There are some crucial additional measures that CCPA requires, and therefore it does require its own additional bit of due diligence if you're already operating in the European market and you want to start operating in the US. This is one of the key areas where you have to take account of. There are other legislatures in different states in the US that are also looking at bringing in similar legislation. So they're very much sort of on a sort of wait and see, looking to see how this works, and then I think might end up introducing something similar themselves. So indeed, coming back to that sort of how data protection works in different jurisdictions in different countries, this is a very, very important part of it. And indeed, it illustrates the fact that there used to be the saying that if you complied with the law in terms of data protection in Germany, you'd be safe pretty much anywhere in the world. And everyone thought the GDPR would be the same thing, comply with that and you'll be safe anywhere in the world. Not necessarily the case. Sometimes there are additional measures of control that are introduced.
Yeah. So I think
like this.
A lot of the other regulators in different countries, like bringing in these laws, do have GDPR in mind, because GDPR has kind of like set the tone for everyone else. But they do then make like derogations, things like that as well. So
exactly. I mean, even there are a number of countries that have they've not sort of taken GDPR root and branch, but there are a number of countries that are now introducing much more rigorous data protection measures than was the case even just a few years ago. So there is a general awareness of the importance of having these measures sort of built into the infrastructure of your national economy. So countries like Brazil and others are introducing increasingly rigorous legislation because they're realizing if you want to be part of the global marketplace, you need to have these sorts of things in place to give reassurance to then multinational organizations might be looking to invest and move into your country so that they can think, right, we benefit from similar protections here as we would in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah. So moving on to the next one. So this one is about Facebook. So Facebook actually spotted that there was a flaw in their system. So it let 5,000 developers gather personal data through their apps. So the way the Facebook works is if you have an app through Facebook, Facebook is supposed to prevent them from accessing people's data if you've not used it for 90 days. So that's like the things where you log in through Facebook into an app. But Facebook actually realised that this lockout feature that they put in place had not always been working due to a flaw, which it was recorded. They fixed the issue the same day, the day they found out.
Yes, and this goes to the fact that Facebook does have these hundreds of thousands of different developers who are always making new apps, products, and systems, which then benefit from the sort of the environment that Facebook provides, the structure where they can then buy and sell goods and services, or create games, or do whatever. And in this instance, we've got these developers who are able to gather personal data in terms of people's user profile information that they should not have been able to get. I mean, you'll always see with a big corporation, particularly like Facebook, yes, we fixed the issue the day after we found it. So they're saying that to try and reassure their users and to reassure the markets and reassure regulators, say, look, we were on top of this. It will always come down, though, to what actually happens in practice. How was this flaw created in the first place? How long was it in place for? Was it really just a couple of days that it was an issue? What sort of data are we looking at here, crucially as well? Because don't forget that Facebook, it's not just a matter of your name, email address, profile photos, and profile information. It's down to every single click, every single page that you view, your preferences, the movies that you like, the music that you enjoy listening to, other apps that might be connected to it. I say that from the fact that the number of times when you go to a website and it says log in using Facebook. So guess what? When you log into that website, it's then sharing that information back to Facebook. So there can be a very rich tapestry of data there. And I think sometimes we forget how all-reaching that data is. And ultimately, it is monetized. Facebook makes $77 billion a year from advertising based on this rich user data that it has. So we shouldn't be surprised then when issues like this come up where some data accidentally can be accessed by those developers.
So moving on to the next one, I think this is this final one as well. So this is one we was actually talking about earlier. So how do you pronounce the name? I'll let you do that.
It is Huawei.
Huawei, right, okay. So Huawei is actually like already in our country in terms of the 4G and 3G masts, I think, if I'm correct. And Theresa May actually agreed to for Huawei to be involved in the 5G masts that are going to be introduced. Should have been in the next couple of years. Now the Prime Minister is reviewing this decision due to some new information that's been found about the technologies they use. I'll let you talk about this one. You know a lot more than me.
That's absolutely right, Laura. So when Theresa May made that decision, quite right to say it was related to masts and base stations. The idea was there were concerns with regards to Huawei, which was already, there have been arrests in the US where family members of the leadership of Huawei have been arrested, and Huawei was being excluded from networks in the US and by the other members of the Five Eyes Alliance, which includes the US, Canada, UK, Australia and New Zealand, where they share intelligence. And there were concerns that those other countries were turning around and saying, we do not have Huawei in our networks, but the UK does. Now, the UK National Cybersecurity Centre at that time, when this decision was made by Theresa May, said there is no problem with Huawei having access to the non-core areas of the network. As you quite rightly say, masts and base stations. So we see these masts all around our city centres, allowing access to 5G. This is already being used by emergency services. Many handsets are now being sold with it, and data plans that take account of very fast 5G. 5G, just so that people are aware, this is super fast data. 4G was pretty fast. It allows us to do our video streaming and things. The idea is that 5G is crucial when it comes to things like IoT, the Internet of Things, so driverless cars, smart technology, everything from smart-enabled fridges, toasters, kettles, through to sensors, your central heating, internet, smart-enabled lawnmowers, hoovers, everything. The idea is that that will very much be reliant on these 5G networks. It's a very important piece of infrastructure that Boris Johnson, in his election manifesto in 2019, was saying he wants to have 5G available to the majority of the UK by the end of this term. So that's why he wanted to stick with Huawei, because it was already part of the 4G and 3G networks, and their kit allows multiple networks to be used on their masts and base stations. So if you want to roll it out quickly, Huawei is cheap, and it allows multiple networks, and it will allow the government to, in theory, give everyone the access to 5G that they want them to have. We keep coming back to COVID-19. The more that 5G is available, the more that will hopefully help the growth of the digital economy as well. Now, this weekend, that decision now looks like it's going to be changed, because the National Cybersecurity Centre has now changed its advice. It is now saying that because the United States is sanctioning Huawei, it is now not possible for Huawei to purchase the chips and other infrastructure that it was buying from the US before incorporating it into its technology and then selling that around the world. So the fact that Huawei doesn't have the access to this US material means that A, that inhibits their ability to provide the service that they were wanting to do, and indeed amps up now the security risks, because now it will be Chinese manufactured chips rather than those coming from the United States. So as a result, the NCSC turns around and says, all right, we are changing our advice on this. They will then pass a paper to, that will eventually be passed to the Prime Minister to make a decision. And he is now under a lot of pressure from the China research group of the Conservative Party in Parliament to reverse this decision and start having Huawei stripped out of the network. People may remember the European research group, which had a lot to do with Brexit. Well, now there's a China research group. So just when you think you've got rid of one group, another one comes back with even more demands, which is ironic for our Prime Minister. But the implication of this, if you're sat at home thinking, well, so what? The so what is that apparently to strip Huawei out of the network means that then, as Laura said, you'd be taking out Huawei kit that's currently being used to supply 3G and 4G. So in order to sort of take Huawei out of the network, we might actually end up having to take one or two steps back before then taking several steps forward with new 5G equipment. The other problem is that there is not a ready-made provider of 5G infrastructure out there. Huawei is a long way ahead of many other competitors. It's not as though we can just turn around and say to Nokia or Ericsson, hello, can we have your 5G kit, please? Because it's simply not available to do the same job at the same value. There is a lot of talk that the British government and the US government might put money into a telecoms provider so that they can replace and do the same job that Huawei is doing. But you can throw resources at something. It doesn't mean that it's suddenly going to provide an off-the-shelf solution right now. So this will unfortunately mean that having been elected in 2019 and saying 5G for everyone with bells on, that the Prime Minister was saying, it's actually really affecting his ability to deliver on that key pledge at a time when I think the economy is going to want as much 5G access as it can so that we can underpin our growth with that technology.
Yeah, I think we were saying the other day as well that in some areas, obviously you can't get good Wi-Fi connection, so people do rely on the 3G, 4G, especially when they're going to be working from home at the moment. You can't go into the office as much. So the fact that people are relying on this, and it could be down for a good 18 months or so to correct the issue, really.
Exactly, and if you're in there's sometimes a bit of an ivory tower problem here, where if you're in London and the South East, you presume that everyone has access to superfast broadband and Wi-Fi, everyone has access to 4G and 5G. And of course, where we are, Laura, in the north of England, access to connectivity changes whether you're on the bus or in the car or on the train. You'll go through some areas where it's great and you can get full speed, and then a mile or two further on and there's nothing. And that is incredibly frustrating. It takes a very long time for that connectivity to improve. And the idea of actually turning around to someone who's got really poor download speeds in this part of the world and saying, you know what, it's about to get an awful lot worse, that will not go down very well at all with people in the north, as well as in Scotland, in Wales, in the West Country and in the Midlands, where they've been relying on an improvement in connectivity, not a worsening of it. And just saying, well, it means politically, at least we aren't reliant on Huawei. They'll go, well, sorry, I don't care. I just wanted my 5G, please. It's a very, very difficult decision to make, which can have very difficult prospects for the government further down the line.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it for today. So we just, if we have any questions, I don't think we've got any questions coming through. You can always, if you do have any questions about anything, please feel free to email us at admin@digitallawuk.com, or send us a DM on LinkedIn or Facebook or something.
Indeed. So absolutely, if you've enjoyed listening to this, please feel free. We stream this live at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. Is D-Day for us when this goes out. So you're welcome to join us on the live stream and ask any questions. Otherwise, we put up the live recording on our website and on our social media afterwards, and we're working on putting it out as a podcast as well. So if you'd rather just be able to put your headphones in and listen to us when you're out for a walk, walking the dog, or going for a run, then do look out for us there, and we'll be circulating all the information of that again on social media. So I hope everyone has enjoyed this, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you once again to Anson Evaluate for producing this as well. Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you all very much.